My name is Celeste Varga. I'm 33 years old. And the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, when I found 60 unread messages in a family group chat I hadn't opened in 4 months, was when I finally understood that the people who count on your silence the most are always the ones who've mistaken it for permission. The thread was called Orchard House Next Steps. My cousin Daniel had created it. There were 9 members. I was not one of them, or I hadn't been, until my Aunt Miriam added me by accident at 6:47 that morning, apparently intending to add her daughter-in-law instead. My name and her daughter-in-law's name both begin with so. The autocomplete did the rest. I opened the notification the way you open something you aren't expecting, without preparation, standing in my kitchen in socked feet, a pan of water not yet boiling on the stove behind me. 60 messages. The thread went back 11 days. My name appeared once, in a message from Daniel, 9 days earlier. He had written, "Celeste doesn't need to be part of this conversation." Then, below it, a checkmark from every other member of the thread. I read to the bottom. I turned off the burner. Something in me went quiet in the way that large spaces go quiet, not empty, but very, very still. What none of them had thought to check, what none of them had apparently considered checking in 11 days of planning, was the Cascade County property records. The Orchard Lodge at 7 Ridgeline Terrace, Cedar Falls, Washington. 6 acres, timber frame main house, 2 outbuildings, a working orchard of 43 apple and pear trees on the eastern slope. My grandfather's property. In my name. Solely. Since 2017. Recorded, filed, and sitting in the county database exactly where it had been for 7 years. I closed the thread. I did not send a message. I finished making breakfast. My grandfather's name was Istvan Varga, and he had come to Washington State from Budapest in 1968 with a degree in agricultural science, a modest amount of savings, and a belief, which he held without sentimentality and acted on with considerable precision, that the right piece of land, properly kept, was worth more than any salary he would ever earn. He found the Ridgeline Terrace property in 1974, purchased it for what was then an unremarkable sum, planted the orchard in phases over the following decade, and built the timber frame lodge himself over 3 summers with the help of 2 men from his agricultural co-op and a structural engineering manual he had ordered from University Press in Oregon. He was not a sentimental man. He was a meticulous one. He kept records of every tree planted, every yield per acre per season, every repair made to the lodge from the foundation to the ridge beam. He filed his property taxes on the 15th of every February, without exception. He maintained the access easement to the county road with the same regularity he maintained the orchard irrigation lines. When his wife died in 2009, he spent a week in the lodge alone, and then he called me. I was 19, a sophomore at the University of Washington studying environmental resource management, and asked if I wanted to come up for the harvest. I went. I went the next year, and the year after that. After I graduated and took a position with a regional conservation land trust in Seattle, I drove the 2 hours to Cedar Falls on long weekends through the spring and fall seasons, learning the orchard the way you learn something you intend to keep, not all at once, but in layers, each visit adding detail to the one before it. My grandfather noticed. He was not the kind of man who said so directly. What he did instead was begin asking my opinion on decisions, whether to take out the 2 frost-damaged trees on the north row or attempt a graft repair, whether the lodge roof needed full replacement or would hold another season with targeted patching, what I thought about the drainage problem at the base of the east slope. He listened to my answers with the specific attention he gave everything, and occasionally he said, "Yes, that's right," which was as close to praise as his vocabulary ran. In 2016, he told me he was updating his estate documents. He said it the way he said most things, plainly, without preamble, while we were walking the orchard's eastern boundary in the early November light. "I'm transferring the property to you," he said. "Not in the will. Now, while I'm here, I want to see it done correctly." I asked him if he had talked to my father about it, or to Daniel's branch of the family. He was quiet for a moment. We walked another 20 feet before he spoke. "Your father hasn't been to this property in 6 years," he said. "Daniel has been here twice, since your grandmother died. You've been here 41 times in the last 4 years. I counted." He paused again. "The land goes to the person who will work it." He transferred the property through a quitclaim deed executed in January 2017, prepared by an attorney named Gordon Fenn at a firm in Wenatchee. The deed was recorded with Cascade County on February 3, 2017. Title certificate, sole owner, Celeste Marie Varga. My grandfather paid the transfer tax himself and kept a copy of the recorded instrument in a manila folder in the top drawer of his desk, beside the irrigation schedule and the orchard yield logs. He told no one else. I asked him once, about a year later, whether he thought that was a problem, whether my father or my Uncle Bertrand or Daniel would eventually expect to share. He looked at me with the dry directness he used when a question answered itself. The county recorder's office doesn't care about expectations, he said. He died in March 2023, in the lodge, in the chair he had always sat in. He was 81. I had been there for the week prior. He had called me in February and said only that he wanted company, and I had come with my laptop and a bag of groceries and stayed. I was in the kitchen when he died. The sound the house made in the minutes after was the particular silence of a structure settling into what it had always been. I called my father first. He flew in from Phoenix 2 days later. Daniel drove up from Portland. My Uncle Bertrand sent flowers and a fruit basket and did not come. At the memorial reception, held at a venue in Wenatchee, because the lodge felt too small for the attendance, my father and Daniel had a conversation I was not part of, in the corner of the reception hall, that lasted approximately 20 minutes. I noticed it the way you notice weather moving in from the west, not immediately alarming but noted. I did not know, at that point, what they were planning. I would find out 11 days before Thanksgiving. My position at the Conservation Land Trust had evolved over the years from field assessment work into something closer to strategic acquisition. I evaluated properties for conservation easement eligibility, coordinated with county assessors and state resource agencies, and occasionally testified before planning commissions on land use compatibility questions. I mention this not as credential display, but because it explains two things: why I understood property records the way I did, and why I had learned, professionally and personally, that the most consequential documents in any transaction are the ones the other party hasn't read. In the 7 years since my grandfather's deed transfer, I had maintained the property with the same regularity he had. The lodge roof had been replaced in 2020, a full tear-off and redeck contracted through a Wenatchee firm, total cost $22,400, which I paid in 2 installments. The irrigation system on the eastern slope had been repiped in 2021 after a frost line failure at a cost of $7,150. The orchard itself I managed with the help of a part-time orchard hand named Theodore Mack, who came up 3 times a year for pruning, thinning, and harvest assist, and who had worked the property since my grandfather's time. My father knew none of this. He had not been to Ridgeline Terrace since the memorial. Daniel had been once, the previous spring, for a single afternoon. He had walked the orchard with his phone out, photographing the trees and the lodge exterior, and I had noted it without remarking on it. I had thought at the time that he was the kind of person who photographed things he was interested in selling. I had not been wrong. The thread told me the rest. Daniel had contacted a real estate agent named Sean Aldercott at a brokerage in Wenatchee in early November. Aldercott had done a preliminary market analysis and suggested a listing price in the range of $2.1 million, based on comparable rural properties with orchard operations in the Cascade Foothills corridor, the lodge's timber frame construction, and the acreage. Daniel had shared this number with a thread, and my father had responded. That's much better than I expected. My Uncle Bertrand, responding from wherever he was, had written, "When do we list?" The photographs were scheduled for the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. The plan, as I read it across 60 messages, was to have the property photographed, the listing live by the first week of December, and a January closing if possible. The Thanksgiving holiday was to be held at my Aunt Miriam's house in Bellevue, the family gathering that I had apparently already been excluded from, though no one had told me directly. The exclusion was structural. The thread assumed I was not a relevant party to the transaction, and the holiday was the transaction's social backdrop. There was one message from my father, sent 6 days into the thread, that read, "What about Celeste?" Daniel had responded within 4 minutes. "She doesn't have standing. Grandpa's will divided his personal property and accounts. The house goes to the family." My father had replied, Okay. My father had not called me. He had not asked me. He had accepted Daniel's summary of the legal situation, a summary that was incorrect in every material particular, and moved forward. I read this message 3 times. Then I set my phone on the counter and stood at the kitchen window for a moment, looking at the street outside, watching a neighbor's car pull slowly out of a driveway, its brake lights briefly red in the gray morning. I was not surprised. That was the thing I noticed most, the absence of surprise. I had understood for some time that the people in that thread had organized their relationship to my grandfather's property around what they had assumed rather than what they had verified, and that the assumption had been comfortable enough that no one had thought to test it. It was not malice. It was the particular variety of certainty that grows in the absence of questions. I put a note in my work calendar for that afternoon. Cascade County Property Records, confirm. Then I went to work. The Cascade County Assessor's portal returned the result in under 3 minutes. Owner of record, Celeste Marie Varga. Instrument recorded, February 3rd, 2017. I already knew this. I was checking because I wanted the confirmation number and the current record timestamp, which I noted in a document on my desktop. I called Gordon Fenn's office in Wenatchee. Gordon had retired in 2021, but his firm, now under a partner named Renata Solberg, had retained the original file. I had worked with Renata once before on an easement matter. She answered on the second ring. I explained the situation briefly. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "The deed is clean, Celeste. It's been on record for 7 years. There's no instrument that supersedes it. They cannot list that property." I asked her to draft a formal letter to Sean Aldercott at the brokerage, citing the recorded deed and advising that the property was not available for listing without the sole owner's authorization. I asked her to copy my father's address and Daniel's email, both of which I had. "Do you want me to send it today?" she asked. I said yes. "Is there anything else you want to include?" I thought for a moment. "Just the deed as an attachment," I said. "That's enough." She sent the letter at 4:23 that afternoon. I know the timestamp because she copied me on the outgoing. I was in a planning commission meeting in Seattle when it went out, presenting on a wetland buffer assessment in King County. I finished the presentation. I answered questions. I drove home. That evening I opened my personal email and composed a message to Sean Aldercott directly. It was 4 sentences. I identified myself as the sole owner of record of 7 Ridgeline Terrace, Sutter Falls, Washington. I attached the recorded deed. I noted that Renata Solberg's office had already been in touch. I asked him to cancel the photography appointment scheduled for Wednesday. Subject line, for your files. I sent it at 8:11 p.m. and closed my laptop. The photographer canceled at 7:04 Wednesday morning. Aldercott called Daniel at 7:09. I know this sequence because Miriam, who had added me to the thread by accident and had not removed me, was still receiving the thread messages, and 2 of Daniel's responses were sent to the full group before he apparently realized I was still in it. The first message, sent at 7:22 a.m., read, "This has to be a mistake. Grandpa's will." The second, sent at 7:31, was addressed to my father only, but delivered to the thread. "I'm driving up there." He arrived at my apartment building in Seattle at 11:40 that morning. I know because my building has a video intercom and the timestamp is recorded. I was working from home. I watched him ring the buzzer from the intercom screen. He was standing in the rain in a jacket that wasn't quite adequate for the weather, his hair flattened, his expression carrying the specific compression of a person who has been in a car for 2.5 hours with a problem that didn't get smaller in transit. I buzzed him up. He came into my apartment and stood in the entryway and looked at me, and I could see him searching for an opening, for a version of the conversation that would let him arrive at an outcome he had already decided on. He was not a bad person. He was my cousin, and I had known him for 33 years, and I understood that the architecture of his assumption about the orchard had been built over a long time from materials that had never been examined. "Sit down, Daniel," I said. He sat. I put a copy of the recorded deed on the coffee table between us. I did not explain it. I let him read it. His eyes moved down the page. His right hand, resting on his knee, went flat. He read the grantor line, Istvan Varga. The grantee line, Celeste Marie Varga. The recording date, February 3rd, 2017. The instrument number. The notary seal. Gordon Fenn's firm address. He looked up. When did he do this? He said. January 2017? I said. He told me in November 2016. The deed was executed in January and recorded in February. He never said anything. No, I said. A pause. Outside the window, the rain had steadied into the gray, persistent kind that the Pacific Northwest produces in November without drama. The will, he started. The will addressed his personal property and his accounts, I said. The property had already been transferred 6 years before he died. It wasn't in his estate. His attorney can explain the distinction, if that's helpful. He looked at the deed again. Something across his shoulders, a held position he'd carried in from the car, released slightly, not into ease but into a different kind of tension, the tension of revision. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't, I said. Dad is going to, he stopped. Looked at the window. My dad put money into this. He was counting on a share. I had thought about this. My uncle Bertrand had contributed nothing to the property's maintenance in the 7 years since the deed transfer. No repairs, no orchard costs, no property tax assistance, nothing. What he had contributed was an expectation, organized around a story about the family property that had never been examined against the actual record. I understood the expectation. I did not share his accounting of what it was worth. The property is mine, Daniel, I said. Your grandfather made that decision legally with an attorney while he was fully competent 7 years ago. That's the record. Are you going to sell it? No, I said. He was quiet for a long moment. His hand on his knee moved once, fingers pressing flat, then releasing. What are you going to do with it?
Keep it, I said.
Run the orchard. Finish the drainage work on the east slope. I've been meaning to address it for 2 seasons. He looked at me then with an expression I didn't try to name. He picked up the deed, looked at it one more time, and set it back on the table. Grandpa knew what he was doing, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. He always did. He left 20 minutes later. We said goodbye at the door in the ordinary way, without ceremony. I heard the elevator descend. I stood in the entryway for a moment, listening to the building settle, the rain against the window, the ordinary sounds of a Wednesday afternoon. Then I went back to my desk and finished the wetland buffer report that was due by 4. My father called that evening. His call was shorter than Daniel's visit and covered the same ground at higher altitude, the will, the family, what my grandfather would have wanted, whether I had considered how this would affect everyone at Thanksgiving. I let him finish. When he was done, I told him what I had told Daniel, in the same register, with the same answer at the end. There was a long pause. He never told me, my father said. His voice had the quality of a room after furniture is moved, the same space, newly strange. I know, I said. Did you know he was going to do it? He told me when he decided. He said he wanted me to have the property, because I was the one who would keep it. Another pause. You've been up there a lot. 41 times in the 4 years before he transferred it, I said. More since. He was quiet again. Then, carefully, I'm not going to fight you on this, Celeste. I know, I said. I want you to know, I didn't know about the deed. Daniel said it was straightforward. Daniel didn't check the records, I said. That's the only reason any of this happened. He said nothing to that. There wasn't anything to say. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing consequential, whether I was coming to Thanksgiving, which I was not, a question about a cousin's new job, and then we said goodbye. I stood in the kitchen after the call ended, the window dark now, the rain still coming, the city lights diffused and soft through the glass. I thought about my grandfather in the orchard in November light, walking the eastern boundary, telling me the land goes to the person who will work it. I thought about the yellow manila folder in the top drawer of his desk, the deed inside it, the irrigation schedule beside it. I thought about 41 visits counted without sentiment, entered into a ledger the way he entered everything, as fact, as record, as the thing that remains when the conversation is over. Aldercott sent a formal confirmation of listing withdrawal to Renata Solberg's office on the Friday after Thanksgiving. The buyer, who had apparently been in early conversation, A couple from the east side who had seen a preliminary listing preview was notified that the property was no longer available. There were no further legal proceedings. Daniel retained a real estate attorney in Portland for approximately 2 weeks before discharging him. Renata told me this in passing during a call about an unrelated easement matter. My uncle Bertrand sent me a letter, handwritten, that arrived in early December. I read it. It was 2 pages and contained the word family 11 times. I placed it in a folder and did not respond. I drove to Ridgeline Terrace the second weekend of December. The orchard was dormant, the trees bare against a white sky, the lodge cold in the way that buildings go cold when they've been empty for a few weeks. I turned on the heat and walked the east slope, noting the drainage problem at the base of the cut bank. The erosion had progressed since October, and I wanted measurements before I called the contractor. I spent 2 hours on the slope with a measuring tape and a notepad, recording grades and distances, noting the soil composition at the bank face, thinking about whether a French drain system or a rock-lined swale made more sense for the water volume in a high precipitation year. Theodore had done the fall pruning in October. The trees were clean, the cuts precise. The 43 trees my grandfather had planted over 2 decades stood in their rows on the hillside in the December light, bare and orderly, and exactly as they had always been. I stood at the top of the eastern row for a while, looking down the slope toward the tree line and the ridge beyond, and I thought about what my grandfather had said the day he told me he was updating his estate documents. We had been walking this same boundary. The light had been the same quality, low, November gray, the kind of light that makes distances clear. The land goes to the person who will work it. He had not said it as consolation or as apology or as any kind of declaration. He had said it the way he said everything worth saying, as a statement of fact, plainly, to a person he believed capable of understanding it plainly.
I had understood it then.
I understood it now, standing on the slope with a notepad and a measuring tape, in the cold, in the quiet, with the work already begun. There is a particular kind of inheritance that has nothing to do with what's listed in a will. It lives in the records, the deed in the county database, yes, but also the 41 visits, the replaced roof, the repiped irrigation line, the harvest seasons with Theodore, the years of arriving when no one else did. My grandfather understood this. He had organized his entire life around the principle that what you tend is what you keep, and what you keep is what you are. I drove back to Seattle that evening with the measurements in my notepad and a contractor call scheduled for Monday morning. The lodge behind me, the orchard behind me, the eastern slope with its drainage problem already half solved in my head. The things worth having are not the things you claim. They are the things you show up for. Keep showing up. Here's what I want to know. When do you think the balance shifted for good? Was it the moment Renata Solberg's letter reached Aldercott, or the Wednesday morning the photographer canceled, or the look on Daniel's face when he read the grantor line on that deed? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and hit the bell. I put a new story up every week. Like if you've ever held something quietly that no one else thought to look for. Take care of yourselves.